Welcome to Edeline Lee Autumn Winter 2019. This is Mary Beard on women and power. And my big question is how we imagine the relationship between women and power and women and getting things done. And I wonder why it is that we don't see women as powerful or even hear women's voices as authoritative, even when they're expert and knowledgeable. I realised a few years ago that if I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a professor, what did a professor look like? Do you know what I saw? They were a whole array of middle-aged white men. And I thought, blimey, I am a female professor. And yet, professor in my imagination is still coded male. And I suppose now my ambition is very much to change that, to make it seem not just good, right and proper, but also natural for women to play their part in the mechanisms of power, whether that's at a local level, a domestic level, or a national level. And I suppose that I sum that up to myself with the ambition of making it seem good for a woman to be ambitious. Because we know at the moment that if you say about a guy, he's ambitious, that's great. You know, he's going places, he's thrusting onwards. If we say about a woman that she's ambitious, we know there's something to mistrust there. And I'd like to change all that. My ambition is to make it good to be ambitious for a woman.
Britta Schmidt, Executive Director of Women for Women International.
For the last 25 years, I have worked with thousands of women all over the world. Women who have experienced unspeakable atrocities, whose bodies have been used to fight wars. 75% of all casualties in war are women and children. 70% of the poorest in the world are women. Women are systematically abused, violated, raped, and excluded all over the world, every day, just because they are women. Their voices are silenced, their views obliterated, their potential unfulfilled, just because they are women. But women, we are rising up. We are defying the patriarchal norms, the boxes that we've been put in. Our voices are growing stronger and stronger, and we tell about a world where we can live together, peacefully as human beings, without the need to label or discriminate, where we can fulfill our potential, where we can be who we want to be, where we allow our power, and men support us. These changes are happening all over the world as we speak right now. And I want to celebrate this transformation. As I witness another woman's rising, she gives me wings. It is that global sisterhood that means so much. In the power of rising, I recognize myself in another woman. I see you. It reminds me of my sister Amela from Bosnia, a woman I sponsored through the program from Women for Women International 10 years ago. We wrote letters to each other, and she told me about her life and what it was like to grow up in a country affected by conflict, and what it meant to her to be part of a program that brought women together. and what it meant for her to know that I knew that she exists. That there was a sister far away who cared. I see you. So powerful, so simple. We can do that for each other. And in that simple act of acknowledgement, we create a bond so strong that it transforms us all. It is what we call the global sisterhood. Thank you.
Professor Day Jane Francis, Director of the British Antarctic Survey.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk to you today about Antarctica and why it's important for you to understand the importance of Antarctica to you sitting here in London right now. Antarctica is a huge continent over the South Pole. You know it as home to penguins and seals, and I'm sure many of you have seen it on programs on TV with the amazing Sir David Attenborough. But Antarctica has been influenced by us all. As we've burnt coal, as we've driven our cars and burnt oil and gas, all of that carbon has gone into the atmosphere and has caused the climate to warm across the whole Earth. And the thing about the polar regions is that they are the most sensitive places on Earth that are responding to climate change. They respond most dramatically and first. And Antarctica, even though it is remote and hostile, is responding to the global warming that we're creating in the places where most people live. And scientists all over the world, but particularly those from the UK, are trying to understand how Antarctica is being affected by global warming caused elsewhere, and what it's going to do for the rest of the world, because it's going to get its own back on all of us. So scientists are in Antarctica, and what they're discovering is that the warming climates are warming the oceans, and they're lapping against the ice sheets around the edges of Antarctica and causing change. And there are hundreds of scientists in Antarctica right now as I speak. It's the Antarctic summer, and they are trying to understand what's happening to those ice sheets. And what they're finding is that the ice shelves around the edge of Antarctica are beginning to melt from underneath by that warming ocean water. And the really important thing is that those ice shelves are like doorstops. They're holding back the glaciers on the land. And the glaciers on the land contain about 70% of the world's fresh water. And if those ice shelves melt, all those glaciers are going to start moving down into the ocean, and they're going to bring those huge volumes of water, slowly but surely, into the global ocean. And that will affect the whole world. That will affect everybody who is living on the coastal regions. And that includes people in London, it includes people around the whole of the UK. Most of our major cities and population live in coastal areas. So things are changing in Antarctica. There's 4-kilometre thick ice caps on Antarctica, and they're beginning to change. We mustn't be scared of what happens in Antarctica. The scientists will tell us where the future is going, and we need to make sure that we're prepared for this change. Thank you. Thank you.
Sally Gunnell, OBE, DL, Olympic gold medalist in track and field.
I was told I was the wrong size, the wrong colour, and I wasn't tough enough. What does that mean? To stand on the top of that rostrum, you have to use this. And I was never the fastest, I was never the strongest. Technically, I was good. But what I had above everybody else was that mental strength within myself. A year before any major championships, I would make sure I knew what I had to perform out there, what it was going to take to execute that win and cross the line. And then I would spend every single day, whether it be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, going through that race time and time again in my mind. I would watch myself sitting in that stadium, seeing myself run round that track. I'd watch myself in my lounge on that television. in colour, in black and white, executing every single part of that race and making sure I crossed that line and won every single time. It's not just about crossing that line, it's in winning. It's about what happens afterwards. All those people that have helped you, that team of people that you'd built together, that family around you, how does it make them feel? That visualization of the whole thing and how important it is. The other thing I would do is to visualize things that could happen. What happens if the bus turns up late and you can't warm up on the day? In an hour, you've got 20 minutes. How will I adjust? What happens if it's pouring with rain or you hit a hurdle? Every scenario that could happen, and you have to correct it, get back in and cross that line and win in your mind. But you know, I woke up on that day in Barcelona in 1992 absolutely petrified because I knew this was the day, and if I didn't do it today, I would never get this opportunity again. I walked into the stadium, I looked at all my competitors in that warm-up area, the psyching out all starts, everybody trying to win one over each other. I did my warm-up, and then the voice on the far right-hand side said, could the women's 400-metre hurdlists please make their way to the call room? And you know, that's it. This is me. Picked up my bag, and I saw a gate on the far right-hand side. And I thought to myself, nobody makes us do what we have to do in life. I could disappear out of that gate and not do this. I could go and hide. Get back in there. Just do what you've got to do. I always say the people that succeed in life are the ones that control that inner voice, that but-if voice. I'd screw it up in my mind, throw it away. I can do this.
Dr. Susie Lichman, CBE, histopathologist and former president of the Royal College of Pathologists.
The patient is a 64-year-old male who was found to be anemic when he went to donate blood. Subsequent investigations included an upper GI endoscopy, which was normal, and a colonoscopy, which revealed an exophytic tumour in the cecum. Biopsies confirmed this to be a moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. The patient was admitted for surgery, which was uneventful. The specimen received in the pathology lab is a right hemicolectomy, received in formalin and opened on receipt to maximise fixation. No preoperative chemotherapy or radiotherapy was given. Macroscopic description. The specimen is a right hemicolectomy consisting of 350 millimetres of cecum and ascending colon and 40 millimetres of terminal ileum. The appendix is attached and measures 60 millimetres. It appears normal. On opening the specimen, there is a tumour arising 15 millimetres distal to the ileocecal valve. On sectioning, the tumour measures 45 millimetres in maximum dimension, involves approximately 60% of the circumference of the bowel, and appears to extend through the bowel wall into adjacent fat. It does not reach the serosal surface and is well clear of the circumferential resection margin. There is no evidence of tumour perforation. The proximal and distal resection margins are not sampled, as the tumour is macroscopically greater than 30 millimetres from both margins. The remaining bowel mucosa appears normal. Sections taken. A1 to 4, 4 blocks of tumour extending through the bowel wall. A5, circumferential resection margin closest to tumour. A6 to 20, 14 lymph nodes sampled in 14 cassettes, with the high tie node in cassette 5. A21, representative sections of appendix. Microscopic description. The tumour is a moderately differentiated invasive adenocarcinoma. It extends through the bowel wall into adjacent fat. The maximum distance beyond the muscularis propria is 4 millimetres. Carcinoma extends to within 25 millimetres of the circumferential resection margin microscopically. proximal and distal margins not examined. 14 lymph nodes are identified, 5 of which contain metastatic adenocarcinoma. The highest node is not involved. There are no tumour deposits. The appendix is normal.
Patricia Rosario, OBE, FRCM, soprano and professor of singing at the Royal College of Music.
A piece of music written for me by Sir John Taverner. It's based on the memory of Melina Mercouri, who was an actress and a politician.
Rafferty. Professor Anne-Marie Rafferty, CBE, FRCN, Professor of Nursing Policy at King's College London and President of the Royal College of Nursing.
Thank you, Hannah. Nurses embody the contradictions of women in power, both literally and symbolically, through their image and the details of their uniform. Past depictions of nurses cover the spectrum of nursing of female stereotypes, from the ministering angel of the 19th century to the castrating dominatrix of Nurse Ratched in Ken Kesey's novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to the sexualized bimbo of Barbara Windsor's Carry On Nurse. While each of these portraits is a study in power, none of them are necessarily positive. If anything, they can be read as misogynistic. After all, they rely upon a male figure, a patient or a doctor, for their potency. Perhaps there is something deeply ambivalent, then, about nurses and hence women's relationship to power, which is woven literally into the fabric of their uniforms and the twin traditions of religion and military to which they owe their roots. Religious iconography symbolises compassion. The military screams discipline. Both are taken to extreme forms in screen representations designed to create humour or to stress control. The sexy nurse with her tight, short and revealing uniform plays off the modest religious dress, traces of which can be found in uniforms of yesteryear, called the midwife, the veil-like headgear and hats. Military links are perhaps more evident through lapels, belts, buckles and regimental hemlines. The Red Cross or military nurse, a vision of white plumage set against the mud and madness of World War I, is an example of a more positive representation, with such women regarded as symbols of feminine caregiving and hope. Significantly too, when nursing began to emerge as a profession in the early 20th century, advertisements for uniforms presented the nurse as an emblem of modernity, smart, efficient and svelte, a symbol of female independence, very much à la mode and hence in tune with the latest fashion. In 2019, modern-day healthcare, we think about the nurse's uniform as being a totem of modernity, but now we wear scrubs. Differences between professions dissolve. And perhaps we never think about the world of fashion and nursing as being linked. But to transcend the images of the past, perhaps this is just the perfect place for the debate and that transformation to begin. Thank you.
Pauline Fowler, family lawyer and founding partner at Hughes, Fowler, Carruthers.
I'm honoured to be asked to speak at this event along with so many distinguished women. I'm a solicitor, and I would like to talk firstly about those women who blazed a trail for women lawyers. By 2001, when I co-founded my own firm, it barely occurred to me that it was a matter for comment that the senior two of the three founding partners are women. Yet it's only this year that sees the centenary of the Sex Disqualification Removal Act 1919, the statute that permitted women to qualify as solicitors. In 1914, first the Chancery Division and then the Court of Appeal had decided that a woman is not a person for the purposes of qualifying as a solicitor. Gwyneth Bebb, the woman who took that case to court, had already suffered the indignity of receiving no degree from Oxford University, despite having achieved first-class marks in her final examinations. She was clearly not a person for those purposes either. However, the tide in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was turning. In 1878, University College London took the then revolutionary decision to admit women to study law alongside men and, crucially, sit the same degree exams. Shockingly, it took the University of Cambridge until 1947 before it admitted women to its degrees. In 1922, the first woman, Carrie Morrison, was admitted as a solicitor, closely followed by Mary Sykes and by a prominent suffragette, Maud Crofts. Progress was by no means smooth for women lawyers. It must have been very difficult to obtain a place in a firm in 1922, and women were still not regarded as wholly serious contenders even by the time I went off to study. Nearly 60 years after Carrie Morrison became a solicitor, I was sitting in a classroom at the College of Law in which there were roughly equal numbers of the sexes, when one lecturer walked in and remarked that she had heard there were a lot of dolly birds in this class. It was quite useful, actually, because those people who sniggered were people you didn't bother ever talking to again. Partners in firms of solicitors were by and large men, and so were judges. More than one interviewer asked me if I had a family. One asked if I cried easily. That was what we were up against, but we've made it.
Laurence Benaïm, journalist, biographer, and Officier des Arts et des Lettres.
Thank you, Edeline, for inviting me today. It's a great honor, and I'm very proud to be there, although it's difficult to talk about myself, as my job is to talk and write about others. I would like to defend imaginary life as you do. I love the way you celebrate your times by infusing a personal vision full of dreams. Your design is about transmission. It looks at our times are obsessed by instantaneous and real life. Real life has become the ultimate weapon. Real life is about hiding himself or herself behind a street-style hood. Real life is about internet and social media, violence and fear of violence, culture of hate, hate of culture. Real life is supposed to be about selfie, diversity, feminism, veganism, autofiction, self-exhibition, tweets, feel-good books, gender fluidity, and toxic masculinity. Real life is about belonging to a group, better if it's a minority. Logos, artificial intelligence, and mass culture, about being reactive, proacting fast, about telling his life rather than inventing it, about information less than know-how. I don't think goal about real life when real life is about compassion and not passion, anonymity and not self-expression, appearance and not inspiration, uniformity. Real life has transformed designers in entertainers and women in clones, activists or dolls. The choice is actually limited. Everyone has now a message to tell. This is real life. Netflix and the GAFAM are our invisible conscious and bodyguards. Everyone is controlled by his own digital camera. Imagination is not about post-truth. It's a way to protect us, to escape, to deal with our times. It's vitamins, nutriments, to survive. There are 20 milliards of connected objects in the world. There will be 50 milliards in some years. I believe in imagination will be the last luxury and love and spices. We want cooks, hot meals, not fashion buffet. I'm very positively confident about future. As far as there will be artists, it means questions and not answers, convictions and not certainties. I remember my mother. She's not there, but she still gives me the strength. Thank you, love.
Clarissa Ward, Chief International Correspondent for CNN.
I first visited Aleppo in August of 2012. And as we drove towards the outskirts of the city, it was already getting dark. We had to turn off our headlights to avoid detection. And all you could hear as you drove along the road was the crunch of the gravel underneath the tires and the steady thump of artillery fire. At this time, the rebels were in control of the eastern part of the city, and the Assad regime had launched a crushing offensive to try to take back this territory. And the thing about artillery or shelling is it is not a very specific weapon. In fact, it can take many, many times to hit the exact target you want. But it is incredibly powerful psychologically, because as long as you're in this situation where you're hearing this steady thud and thump all around you, you live in very real fear for your life. And as we arrived at the house of the Syrian family who were hosting us, we saw that close up. These Syrians who host us are some of the most generous and brave souls that I know, because what they do to give us a place to stay, that takes real courage. And I went into one room and I sat with the women, and there was a woman who was rocking back and forth on the ground, just moaning softly, "Tayara, tayara," which means plane, plane. And another woman was saying to her, "No, ukhti, it's not a plane. It's just the shelling. It will be over soon." And you could feel the sense of palpable fear. You could feel the sense to which people's nerves were just shredded by this relentless bombardment day in and day out. And then I went and sat with the men, and the dynamic was totally different. The men didn't talk about being afraid. They ignored it. They wouldn't speak of the fear, but it was still in that room. And you could feel it in their heavy smoking, in their tense demeanor, in the squabbling that would break out. And finally, at about 2 a.m, the shelling died down, and I could literally feel my muscles relax. And the fear of death just leaving for one moment, you start to breathe again. But at 5 a.m, the planes came, and you could hear the jets circling overhead, and there's this sick fear in your stomach because you don't know where the payload will land, but you know that it will land. And you know statistically you're unlucky if you get hit, but somehow that does little to stop your fear.
Isabella McPherson, co-founder of Platform Presents.
And on a lighter note, Room Service, written by Tuppence Middleton and John Hopkins. Interior, hotel, evening. We open on a hotel corridor, has seen better days. Faded glamour, 4 doors. 2 either side of the corridor, facing each other. Off screen. How strange. Interior, hotel room 1. A refined older woman is fixing her hair and dressing for a special occasion. She is wearing an elaborate dress of a style long since outdated. We shall call her the Dowager. The room looks homely, lived in. Several photographs line the walls, hinting at a colourful past. Elegant parties, luxurious homes, travel. She stands in the centre of a lineup, women in uniform saluting in front of a grand old English house. 2 men plant kisses on her cheeks, her face screwed up in delight. A portrait of a young woman in an evening gown posing next to a staircase. In the last photo, her younger self smiles at the camera, proudly clutching a newborn baby. We sense the presence behind her as she applies her lipstick in the mirror. The Dowager. I was assured the money would be with you this morning, darling. I'll make another call. Hotel manager. With all due respect, madam, you said that last month. She finds his eye in the mirror. The Dowager. Madam, now is it? Oh, for God's sake, how long have we known each other? When have I ever let you down? Hotel manager. Well, Dowager. Besides, it's my birthday. You can't ask me for money on my birthday. He looks frustrated, knows this going well. Dowager, it slipped my mind. You know what my memory's like. I'll call Mr. Christie and have him send over the money first thing tomorrow morning. How's that? Hotel manager, is that a promise? Dowager, darling, you have my word. Now piss off, I've got a party to prepare for. Interior, hotel corridor. Back in the hallway, we see the hotel manager exit the Dowager's room. We pan back to see a young couple coming around the corner at the opposite end. The young woman drapes her arms lovingly around the young man's neck as he scans the room numbers distractedly. She slows to a stop and pulls him back up against the wall. They kiss. He breaks their embrace and leads her by the hand down to the second room on the right, room 2, next to the Dowager. The young man takes a room card from his pocket and hands it to the young woman. Young man, I called ahead. A little surprise for you.
Tammy Smolders,
President of Wednesday, London.
Reading from Thorstein Veblen, Theory of the Leisure Class. Conspicuous consumption of valuable goods is a means of reputability to the gentleman of leisure. As wealth accumulates on his hands, his own unaided effort will not avail to sufficiently put his opulence in evidence by this method. The aid of friends and competitors is therefore brought in by resorting to the giving of valuable gifts at expensive feasts and entertainments. Presents and feasts had probably an other origin than of native ostentation, but they required their utility for this purpose very early, and they have retained that character to the present, so that their utility in this respect has now long been substantial ground on which these usages rest. Costly entertainments, such as the potlatch or ball, are peculiarly adapted to serve this end. The competitor with whom the entertainer wishes to institute a comparison is, by this method, made to serve as a means to an end. The leisure rendered by the wife is, in such cases, of course, not a simple manifestation of idleness or indolence. It is almost invariably occurs disguised under some form of work or household duties or social amenities, which prove on analysis to serve little or no ulterior or end beyond showing that she does not occupy herself with anything that is gainful or that is of substantial use. As has already been noticed under the head of manners, the greater part of the customary round of domestic cares to which the middle-class housewife gives her time and effort is of this character. Not that the results of her attention to household matters of a decorative and multifaceted character are not pleasing to the same sense of men trained in the middle-class proprietaries, but the taste to which these effects of household adornment and tidiness appeal is a taste that has been formed under the selective guidance of a canon of proprietary that demands these evidences of wasted efforts. The effects are pleasing to us chiefly because she is the wife.
Reni Eddo-Lodge, journalist and author.
I'm no longer engaging with white people on the topic of race. Not all white people, just the vast majority who refuse to accept the legitimacy of structural racism and its symptoms. I can no longer engage with the gulf of an emotional disconnect that white people display when a person of color articulates their experience. You can see their eyes shut down and harden. It's like treacle is poured into their ears, blocking up their ear canals. It's like they can no longer hear us. This emotional disconnect is a conclusion of living a life oblivious to the fact that their skin color is the norm and all others deviate from it. At best, white people have been taught not to mention that people of color are different in case it offends us. They truly believe that the experiences of their life as a result of their skin color can and should be universal. I just can't engage with the bewilderment and the defensiveness as they try to grapple with the fact that not everyone experiences the world in the way that they do. They've never had to think about what it means in power terms to be white. So anytime they're vaguely reminded of this fact, they interpret it as an affront. Their eyes glaze over in boredom or widen in indignation. Their mouths start twitching as they get defensive. Their throats open up as they try to interrupt, itching to talk over you, but not really listen because they need to let you know that you've got it wrong. The journey towards understanding structural racism still requires people of color to prioritize white feelings. Even if they can hear you, they're not really listening. It's like something happens to the words as they leave our mouths and reach their ears. The words hit a barrier of denial and they don't get any further. That's the emotional disconnect. It's not really surprising because they've never known what it means to embrace a person of color as a true equal with thoughts and feelings that are as valid as their own. Watching The Color of Fear by Lee Man-wha, I saw people of color break down in tears as they struggled to convince a defiant white man that his words were enforcing and perpetuating a white racist standard on them. All the while, he stared obliviously, completely confused by this pain, at best trivializing it, at worst ridiculing it. I've written before about this white denial being the ubiquitous politics of race that operates on its inherent invisibility. So I can't talk to white people about race anymore because of the consequent denials, awkward cartwheels, and mental acrobatics that they display when this is brought to their attention. Who really wants to be alerted to a structural system that benefits them at the expense of others?
Dr. Marta Weiss, Senior Curator of Photographs at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Lack of sharp focus was a fundamental feature of Julia Margaret Cameron's photographs and the subject of much comment among her contemporaries. Her friend Coventry Patmore wrote, "Mrs. Cameron was the first person who had the wit to see that her mistakes were her successes, and henceforth to make her portraits systematically out of focus." In 1874, she gave her own retrospective account of the discovery of her most noteworthy technique. "My first success in my out-of-focus pictures were a fluke, that is to say, that when focusing on coming to something which to my eye was very beautiful, I stopped there, instead of screwing the lens to the more definite focus which all other photographers insist upon." Although Cameron stated that she began making her out-of-focus pictures as a fluke, she immediately contradicted herself with an account of her highly controlled process of focusing until the picture looked beautiful. On the one hand, she seemed to deflect credit for the discovery, while on the other, she described a conscious rejection of the more definite focus which all other photographers insist upon in favor of what she found to be beautiful. The words fluke, mistake, accident, and chance recur in contemporary criticism of Cameron's photographs. The meanings of the terms differ, but collectively, they imply a lack of agency on Cameron's part. This relates both to her status as a woman and to her technique, which was alternately praised for its artistry and attacked for its slovenliness. Some authors thinly veiled their condescension with apologies, including, "We are sorry to have to speak thus severely on the works of a lady," or supposed self-restraint, such as, "It would be ungallant to say more in this strain." Others were more blatantly sexist. One critic wrote, "For Mrs. Cameron's heads, there must be some excuse made for them being the work of a woman. But even this does not necessitate such fearlessly bad manipulation." Even when critics did not explicitly mention the fact that Cameron was a woman, their comments regarding her technical competence, or lack of it, carried gendered implications.
Findlater, CEO of the Bounce Back Foundation.
Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in the UK, was a part of my family's history, and from childhood I was struck by her determination to be condemned for what she did, becoming an icon and a victim of injustice. The thing that ultimately condemned her to death was her appearance. Her decision to maintain her glamorous facade up to the end led the judge and the jury to take just 20 minutes to sentence her to death as someone that they saw as a tart. This downfall became her power. She became a martyr to her own cause and a historical icon as she went on to the gallows with dignity in a society which just saw her as a fallen woman who had murdered her lover and who had terrible bleached blonde hair. A year later, the law changed and she wouldn't actually have been executed. Fast forward several years, and I now spend my time working within a criminal justice system in crisis, in a country that has one of the highest rates of imprisonment in Western Europe, and chronically overcrowded prisons warehousing over 3 times as many people as were in Ruth's day. It costs us all, taxpayers, society, and communities, as we keep people in violent and decrepit institutions for the same cost per year as sending someone to public school. As it was with Ruth, crime is often caused by abusive relationships, drug or drink problems, poverty, poor mental health, or through abuse and neglect at an early age. We all deserve a justice system that tackles these underlying causes of crime and invests in prevention. People going in and out of prison create even more victims. We can never imprison our way to a safer society, but we can try and change people. And what does change look like? We work daily to change individuals and circumnavigate challenges to try and do what we can. But more importantly, we spend a lot of time trying to point out to people that it's not very hard to land up in prison. A high-flying banker in a car accident in terrible weather conditions, no speeding, no drink driving, but the person that he had the accident with lost her baby as a result of the car crash, and he landed up in prison. There, but for the grace of God, go all of us. Transformation is as much what we do as the work of a fashion designer creating a magnificent outfit to help someone feel $1 million. People literally start to strut their stuff as they leave their old lives behind and regain their new look, re-access to the world.
Ann Seba, author and biographer.
War used to be considered an exclusively male preserve. It was men who fought and men who were killed, and men whose versions of battle informed those left at home as to what it was all about. No longer. Women are just as involved in war as men. War comes to people's homes now. There are no longer any front lines. Hospitals and orphanages can no longer be considered soft news. Women fight in wars. Women are raped as part of the spoils of war. Above all, women report wars. And it's women's version of war that we all now read. Since women are the ones who have to feed those left behind and who risk being killed as they do so, it's time we considered what happens to women in war, as I have done in my book Les Parisiennes, how the women of Paris lived, loved, and died under Nazi occupation. War is now on the home front, and in France during World War II, women were left to face the German occupier, the enemy. How should they react? By smiling so they received food for their children, by spitting in their faces, by walking out of a cafe if the enemy appeared, or by turning the Gothic road signs around. All these decisions were choices that the women of Paris had to make because the men had been defeated. They had gone into hiding or been captured or killed. The women had to remain strong, and sometimes being strong meant colluding with the enemy. It wasn't nice, nor what they wanted. It was a question of survival. What other means did they have to resist? Well, they decided that remaining chic, fashionable, and stylish was important for their sense of self. The one thing an occupying army could not do was destroy that. Wearing tricolor buttons, huge extravagant hats that looked like vegetable gardens, or bouffant turbans covering up their cork shoes with scraps of fabric that they had found. These all became, in a way, a form of resistance. Of course it wasn't enough on its own, and they did much else besides that often cost them their lives. As Martha Gellhorn, one of the bravest and most astute of all correspondents in World War II stated, "War happens to people, one by one." That's really all I have to say, and it seems to me I have been saying it forever. Unless they are immediate victims, the majority of mankind behaves as if war was an act of God which could not be prevented, or they behave as if war elsewhere was none of their business. Well, sadly, it is all of our business. War is no respecter of gender. Thank you for listening.
Baroness Jane Bonham-Carter, politician and Liberal Democrat member of the House of Lords.
I want to talk about friendship, a particular female friendship, and how important it is, and how it sustains one even after the death of the friend in question. And I also want to talk of courage. And it comes very opportunely after what you have just heard, because I'm talking about my friendship with Marie Colvin, whose great, great heroine was Martha Gellhorn. She was a war correspondent killed in Syria, an American who made her life and career in this country which she loved. And we met many years ago now, instantly bonded, and our relationship was a constant in both our lives. But her supreme skill as a great journalist, as one of the greatest foreign correspondents, was not analysing world politics, not in unpacking political strategy. It was telling the stories of the ordinary people affected by the events that came in their wake. Someone, she said, has to go there and see what is happening. And more than that, her mission, which she achieved brilliantly, was to relay their words to the outside world. People opened up to her, and she told us, through them, the truth about conflict and war. They trusted her, and she was infinitely interested in them, and she was extraordinarily brave. The stories of her courage are legion and now almost legend. But the one that stands out for me, and until the Arab Spring did for her, was East Timor. There she stood her ground with two other incredibly brave women. There she exemplified her kind of journalism and her kind of bravery, refusing to leave a UN compound, refuge to 1,500 women and children when all others did, when her male editor in London said to her, "But where are all the men?" She replied in a very Marie-like way, "I guess they've gone. I guess they don't make men as they used to." Everyone in that compound got out alive. She lost her eye in Sri Lanka, telling the story of the Tamils. She finally lost her life in Homs, having crawled through a tunnel because she couldn't cross a border. And there she was targeted and murdered by President Assad. I know what she and I would be talking about now, what she would be condemning along with me with all her great passion. Trump and his wall, Brexit and its barriers. Walls and barriers were totally antipathetic to Marie. She refused to accept them and circumvented them all her life. She was right. I went to her funeral in Oyster Bay in America, and there the stars and the stripes were dipped in her honour, and there were the locals there to welcome her in her sad demise. But there were also Tamils and Syrians from across that great country who had come to say their respects. An America that is so unlike what Trump is trying to forge.
Beatrix Ong, MBE, designer and author.
Designers want to make things better. When one year the brief for the Design of the Year's Award was change, no one designed anything to change things for the worse. No designer thinks, oh wait, how can we make this worse? Unless they're a complete arsehole. Yet, We don't ask enough questions about the substances and the manufacturing of materials that we use. And the rate at which we ask them is too slow to turn environmental changes around. We're inundated all the time about how the things we purchase affect people and the planet. Yet, when we need that one thing that we grab at lunchtime for that evening dew, we'll push aside these warnings and we'll push aside climate change as we rush to the till. But we won't take a plastic bag. We've been told that single-use plastic is all evil, that the straw is a villain. A campaign is made, and when the villain, the straw, and its evil sidekick, the water bottle, we're told in law might be completely obliterated, we cheer. And that's okay, but it's only in the rightish direction. Because sanitary towels, medical equipment, and packaging escape the wrath, even though we use them far more than the straw. The challenge for a designer now is not only to make alternatives, but to make better versions, and to be kept informed, innovate, and offer these better versions so that people desire them over the less planet-friendly options. At the end of the day, a designer is pursuing happiness. So in the context of the environment, why should we do things any other way than to equip ourselves with information to make things better and ultimately to not be assholes?
Dr. Priyanka Joshi, biochemist at the University of Cambridge.
Today, I'd like you all to think about your first happy memory with a person you loved. Now imagine that being snatched away from you forever. 50 million people are living with dementia today, with an estimated worldwide yearly cost of about $1 trillion. These numbers will double in the next 20 years. Despite these staggering numbers, what we do not have yet is a cure, or even a diagnostic tool to detect the early progression of the disease. Do you know that Alzheimer's begins about 20 years prior to its clinical presentation? The hallmarks of the disease are amyloid plaques and tangles that are aggregates, essentially, that form clumps and interact with all different subcompartments of the cell and eventually lead to the death of neurons. And these dead neurons, you cannot get them back. In the early stages of the disease, these levels are not quantitative enough for detection and diagnosis. So you only detect the disease in the advanced stages with no return. The decline first begins in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex. These are the regions of your brain which are responsible for memory. And then this aggregation spreads to the rest of your brain. And these toxic aggregates keep interfering with the basic cellular processes, leading to complete destruction. Now, what we do not know yet are the exact triggers to this aggregation, which we call protein aggregation. Is it just genetic, which is sort of known, or are these external or internal events that set up the failure of homeostasis? If we understand these processes, we can design a cure and also an early diagnosis. Of course, a lot of people do experience healthy aging, so there is hope. This also shows that there is a lot that we do not understand very well. With my research, I'm investigating these external and internal triggers that could lead to the onset and rapid progression of Alzheimer's disease in old age. Essentially, these are small molecule metabolites that change with different processes. Can modulating food habits or physical habits, such as exercise, contribute to the physical onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease? Well, I'll say we'll find out.
Lynn Franks, OBE, wise woman, changemaker, activist, and influencer.
Hi there. What a brilliant idea this is. When I started or put together the first catwalk venue for London Fashion Week 1,000 years ago, I never thought I'd end up actually on the catwalk speaking about something that's so close to my heart all these years later. And I have to congratulate Edeline Lee, the designer. I think this idea is the most interesting fashion presentation that I've ever come across. I hope you all agree. So I'm going to talk to you about the work that I do now, because I've changed from fashion over the years to working with women and women's empowerment. I write books, I do workshops, and I have spent a lot of time working with women really all over the world, from rural African villages to women's prisons over here, working with the Prince's Trust, post-war zones, on the whole area of how women can actually work together and create change in their community, even in the very worst poverty and deprived situations. So I've recently been working for the last 2 years on something I call the Power of Seven, which is about 7 archetypes, 7 feminine archetypes, which I believe will, when they come together and we work together both on our own inner archetypes and as a group of 7, as women in community, we can change the world. So please forgive me for reading this, because I just want to make sure I get it right. I believe that our modern world, so clearly defined by the twin pillars of power and greed, will become a safe environment for my grandchildren and the generations to come, when women and men rise up from the grassroots to create an evolution based on love, not fear. An unseen grid of small pods, networks, and communities led by women, based on feminine values and dedicated to a sustainable world, can unite in their commitment to create a new kind of future which will empower, enrich, and engage the lives of all beings, and indeed the planet herself. I call this the pod effect. Now, at the wise woman stage of my own life, experience and knowledge has given me the necessary heartfelt skills to support other women on this journey of change. I have developed 7 traditional archetypes for our inner and our outer selves, archetypes which I see as tools for women of the modern age to use as a new form of leadership modality, which is circular, not linear, and comes from the ground up. When our 7 archetypes are in harmonious balance, we can become whole, creative, passionate, and work together to create change. The 7 archetypes are seed sower, the creative, the alchemist that makes the impossible possible, the storyteller that spreads the information and rewrites our own story, medicine woman dealing with the well-being of ourselves, our projects, our community businesses, our initiatives, wise woman who makes sure, vision keeper, that the vision and the values are kept, I have to get myself, space weaver, the artist that creates the space, the healing space for others, sky dancer, which is the part of us that creates the relationships, the tantric relationship builder. And finally, I have to remember, because I can't remember what I just said, if I've done 7 already. But anyway, the 7 archetypes have been proven to work incredibly powerfully, both for healing ourselves and for healing others and leadership groups. So I'll be coming back, I'm sure, another time to talk more about it. And I just would again like to say a big congratulations to Edeline for doing this fantastic event this afternoon.
Professor Daewoo Hall, DBA, computer scientist and executive director of the Web Science Institute.
So this, of course, is what I normally do in my day life. I started out, I was always good at mathematics, and by the age of 6 I was teaching others mathematics. But I decided when I was choosing my A-levels I wanted to be a surgeon. This is in the late 1960s, and my headmistress told me, Wendy, medicine is not a career for women. You will go to university and read mathematics. So I did, and I hated it at the time, but actually I've had a great career as a result. No one told me women couldn't do mathematics. And then when I got my PhD from the University of Southampton, I went to look for a job. I couldn't find an interesting job teaching maths, and so I drifted into computer science in the 80s, was just emerging, and I went back to Southampton as a lecturer in computer science. No one told me women didn't do computer science. And I started out my research career in this thing called artificial intelligence back in the 80s, building intelligent tutoring systems. No one told me women didn't do AI. And then I got interested in this new idea of putting computers and videos onto, putting pictures and videos and sound onto computers. Lots of people told me that was a silly idea. Look at all the phones out there today with computers, pictures. Anyway, with the help of some very good mentors, I stuck with that, and I'm now known as a pioneer of multimedia and hypermedia and everything to do with the web and the internet. And I'm a dame, I'm a professor, I'm a fellow of the Royal Society, I'm a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, I was the president of the BCS, I was the president of the Association of Computing Machinery, I founded the Web Science Research Initiative with others, and 2 years ago I wrote the government's strategy for artificial intelligence, which is now being implemented as part of an industrial strategy sector deal. I have found my voice through technology, but so many women do not see the point of being in technology. They don't understand it, they don't like it, we don't encourage young girls to go into technology. And it's so important that more women find their voice through technology to help us design the future. And it's so important with artificial intelligence, because this is set to dominate our worlds, and we really need a diverse group of people helping us design the intelligent systems of the future. Thank you.
Dame Helena Morrissey, DBE, Head of Personal Investing at L&G and founder of 30% Club.
Unfashionably, my area of expertise is money. I've worked in the finance industry for over 30 years, and frankly, it's an alienating environment for women. The Gordon Gekko greed is good image isn't too far from the truth. And it's hardly surprising, therefore, that there are very few financial companies that are run by women. I think that means that the finance industry is often quite out of touch with what women really want or need. It's one of the reasons why we women tend to have an ambivalent or awkward relationship with our finances. We love talking about careers, family, health, and of course fashion with our friends, but money is still a taboo subject. It seems boring, geeky, embarrassing even. When was the last time you discussed your financial well-being? The problem is that if we don't talk about something, it probably means we're not actually dealing with it. And not dealing with money really puts women at a disadvantage. I truly believe that money gives men the power to run things, and that we won't have gender equality until we've done something about wealth inequality. I'm not talking about becoming more materialistic. I'm talking about being empowered, and critically about avoiding financial hardship. At present, at the age of 65, the average British woman has a pension pot. The wealth of her pension is 1/5 of the size of the average man's, leaving her vulnerable in old age. I'm on a mission to use my power to try to help more women have better financial futures. I'll be honest, it can seem quite daunting sometimes. There are so many aspects to the problem. The starting point is closing the gender pay gap, and I'm trying to do what I can to equalize career opportunities, but also trying to encourage more men to play a part in their family's upbringing as well, to not just see being an alpha male as the only way of succeeding. But when women get the promotions, we also need to be able to ask for pay rises. I'm not saying that we need to act like men to be as valuable as men. In fact, I think it's really vital that we women are valued for the feminine traits that we bring. But we do need to learn how to ask. The 30% Club has a mentoring scheme. Nearly 2,500 people are on it this year. And it's specifically aimed at mid-career women because that's when we're most at risk of selling ourselves short. But addressing the gender pay gap is only one important step. Wealth is a function of how much we earn, how much we spend, and how much we invest. So at Legal & General, I'm trying to engage more women around the topic of investing. To start with, I'm trying to bust the myth. You don't have to be wealthy to invest. You can invest from as little as £20 a month. And also, we need the information that we need to be smart about saving on our savings. There are tax-efficient ways of saving. But most importantly, I'm trying to encourage women to recognize that collectively, if we put our money where our mouths are, about our issues that are important to us, like climate change and gender equality, we can actually create the world we want to see. If we want to buy 1 can of beans, we have to take what's available on the shelf. If we want to buy 1 million cans of beans, the manufacturer will ask us what ingredients we'd like them to use. Last year, we launched the Gender in Leadership, or Girl Fund. It invests more in those companies that are doing the most for women in the workforce and less in companies that are doing less. Individually, money gives us the opportunity for a better life. Collectively, money enables us to create the world we want to live in.
Dr. Zoe Whitley, Curator of International Arts at Tate Modern and Curator attached to the 2019 British Pavilion, the Venice Biennale.
The artist's aesthetic sensitivity and acute visual empathy feels like a divine gift, bestowing to us as viewers an offering. She makes visible what's otherwise never before existed physically. She's engaged in relaying to us how difficult, impossible even, it is to truly see or experience the world through someone else's eyes. She refers to an esoteric notion, cosmic measuring. As I understand it, it's an awareness of the wondrous unknowability of the observed world. We move through it, armed with empirical data, inured to illusions of clarity and distinctness. Instead, personhood comes into indistinct soft focus, not revealing all on its surface, but requiring time, manifest through our reciprocal care and attention. Biblical allusion underpins many of the works. This is an indelible imprint from her childhood imagination. The work is about the burial of the body, when it leaves its state of personal definition, and the assumption of the soul when it joins the infinite. From this point on, subject and object are indivisible once again. I'm reminded here that the subject and object are ever bound up in culture. To quote Selma James, to delimit culture is to reduce it to a decoration of daily life. Culture is plays and poetry about the exploited, ceasing to wear miniskirts and taking to trousers instead. The clash between the soul of black baptism and the guilt and sin of white Protestantism. Culture is also the shrill of the alarm clock that rings at 6 a.m. when a black woman in London wakes her children to get them ready for the baby minder. Culture is how cold she feels at the bus stop and then how hot on the crowded bus. Culture is how you feel on Monday morning at 8 when you clock in, wishing it was Friday, wishing your life away. Culture is the speed of the line or the weight and smell of dirty hospital sheets, and you, meanwhile, thinking what to make for tea that night. Playwright Lorraine Hansberry once remarked that the true depth of art required to render the infinite varieties of the human spirit hangs somewhere between despair and joy.
Jane Rapley, OBE, Professor Emerita and former head of Central St. Martin's, Pro-Vice Chancellor of University of the Arts, London.
When I first joined the University of the Arts, London, it was called the London Institute. And in its formative years, it was run by a really rough, tough business marketing executive academic. And he behaved like a classic alpha male. He was extremely competitive with his male colleagues. He was extremely flirty with his female colleagues. He had a spectacular temper, and he bullied people. But he was also very instinctive, and he was very perceptive about people. And he was unusual in that he promoted so many women to his senior team and throughout his organization that it became known as the Women's Institute. I worked for one of these women that he promoted, and I found her rather difficult. She admitted that she was quite difficult. Why did I find her so challenging to work for? Because she didn't behave how I thought a woman might behave. She behaved like him. She flirted with the male members of staff. She was very driven. She was very forceful. And she was very focused. But eventually, we found a way of working together because we were different. She thought differently from me. And I admired her, and I learnt from her, and I listened. She was extremely strategic. She was very focused. And one thing I have to learn is that no matter whether male or female, people don't always conform to their stereotypes. Because we worked together so well, we became a good team, and to this day we are still good friends. And that brings me to the real point of what I want to say today. People think in different ways, and it concerns me that our schools do not recognize the different thinking style of the people that they educate. We need to help our students to understand each other, respect each other's way of thinking, and to work together. Otherwise, they're not going to survive in our new technological age.
Carmel O'Connell, MBE, author, activist and founder of Magic Breakfast.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. Lovely to have beautiful clothes on. Thank you, Edeline, for this opportunity. When you think about children being too hungry to learn, when you think about a child being angry or upset, or maybe even fainting in the classroom because they haven't had anything to eat since the day before, you don't tend to think about this country, do you? You tend to think about places that are far away. But right now, and this morning, at least 500,000 children started their school day too hungry to learn. All across the UK, we have children who, for no fault of their own, wake up in a home with no food and go to school where the most important lessons are taught in the morning. I founded Magic Breakfast when I was writing a book for the business community on how do we bring business leaders to make more of a contribution to making this a fairer society. When I was doing interviews, I was asking head teachers, have we made a fairer as well as a richer society? And they said, Carmel, we have to bring in food every single day in order to be able to teach. More than half the teachers up and down the country have to bring in food every single day in order to be able to teach. And I was so shocked. And I said, hang on, what are the parents doing? You know, breakfast isn't expensive. What are they doing? And this group of head teachers, they said, Carmel, the parents are hungry themselves. And we know from the rise of food banks, and we know from what we're now seeing, that hunger is a big problem. But I want you to help Magic Breakfast to end hunger as a barrier to learning in this country. Magic Breakfast is absolutely determined. We work with the food industry. We work with anyone who feels that a child should be able to learn. A child should be able to have the opportunity to come into the fashion industry. They should have the opportunity to be a glamorous model, to be able to live their potential. We feed 100,000 children at the moment. We need to reach about 1 million. So Magic Breakfast is something that I think is a very simple proposition. At school I was in this morning, head teacher said to me, a child behind me used to be hungry. They're not anymore. That's magic. Thank you very much.
Grace Savage, singer, songwriter, and UK beatbox champion.
Layer 1. Layer 2. 1. 2. 3. 2. 3. 4.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Grace Savage and I am a professional beatboxer. And one of the most common questions I've been asked throughout my career is, how did you get into beatboxing? In fact, I've been asked that 5 times today already. And I give people the answer that I knew a few beatboxers from this little town that I grew up in. I learned from them and from tutorials on the internet. And then I just practiced loads. And they always seem a bit dissatisfied with that answer, like it's too obvious, it's not exciting enough. And the look in their eyes says, yeah, but it can't be as simple as that. But it is. The thing is, people still know very little about beatboxing. And in the 14 years that I've been doing this weird thing, I've noticed something. At one end of the spectrum, you have this idea that beatboxing is this totally unattainable thing that you can only do if you have some sort of God-given gift. People see it as this jaw-dropping, mind-bending magic trick, but at the same time, because we all have a voice, it feels totally accessible and within our grasp. So people see it as a bit of a gimmick, something that anyone can just have a go at by saying boots and cats. Both, and neither, are true. Basic beatboxing is not that hard. You're all making these percussive sounds with your voice every single day. Advanced beatboxing, however, is hard, and it takes hours, weeks, months, years of hard work and dedication to learn. So next time you see a beatboxer performing and you're impressed, don't ask, how did you do that? Ask, how long did it take you to learn that?
Gayleen Gold, broadcaster and head of cinema and events at the British Film Institute.
I'm really glad I get to follow the beatboxer. Thanks, Grace. If I had a superpower, I would want my superpower to be invisibility. Now, you might think that's weird, given the fact that we've had all these amazing women being incredibly visible today, which has been amazing for you all, I know. Still, though, I would want my superpower to be invisibility. You might think that's really strange, given that we open with Mary Beard today. She talks about an amazing relationship between voice and power, especially for women. I am, as you can see, a woman of colour, which means I come from a long history of civil rights struggles where people have fought for voice and fought for visibility. Particularly because of that, I would like the power of invisibility. which you might think is really strange, given that beneath me or below me or behind me is a generation of amazing young women coming through who are really declaring their voice and demanding that they get taken seriously and demanding and taking their space, all of which I'm immensely proud. Still, I would want invisibility. Why, you might ask? Because visibility is exhausting. It's really exhausting to be highly visible. And when you are a woman of color, like I am, and I've spent most of my life trying to create spaces, broader spaces, for people like me to exist in, for a wider range of people and experiences to be normalized in some way. When that happens, I become highly visible. I'm often the only one in a space. And when I'm the only one in a space, I become like a big projector screen, and everybody projects onto me. They think I'm really confident. They think I'm really scary. They think I'm really loud. They think I'm really bolshy. They think. And what that takes away from me is where my humanity lives. And where my humanity lives is in my vulnerability. So what I really hope for is a power of invisibility so I can just be normal.
Jacqueline Perry, QC, barrister and Queen's Counsel at 2 Temple Gardens.
I'm going to speak to you with a title that is counterintuitive. Lawyers are a good thing. And a lot of people think of lawyers as a bad joke. There are a lot of dreadfully old conundrum jokes. What do you call a group of lawyers chained at the bottom of the ocean a good thing? Actually, you don't realize it, and the world doesn't realize it, but if you examine it, lawyers, in fact, are a good thing. They're terribly necessary. Why do you think there is safety in your homes, in your cars, in shops, in factories? I assure you it's not because owners and governments take a view when they're sitting in their offices thinking of their profits. What can we do to make life easier, safer, and better for people? It's because somebody has brought a case in court, created a situation whereby somebody's had to pay damages or pay out for having caused injury or death. And it causes improvements. Any attempt to curtail the power of the law and lawyers is going to rebound. There are 3 expressions in the world that a lot of people think are the biggest lies. Often it's, I love you. Second is, the check's in the post. And the third is, that was coined by the last government, access to justice. Access to justice was created by a Lord Chancellor who decided to abolish civil legal aid. And in doing that, he abolished people's access to courts, to lawyers. So now, isn't it good fun? The law is like the Ritz. If you can afford it, you get the lawyers. Don't be misled, and let me tell you one thing that you may not know. You were lied to when people said it was going to cost money to continue with the law. It wasn't. The government made a profit, and they then abolished us.
Shahira Fahmy, architect and actor.
Thank you. Cairo, Egypt, June 2018. A friend, R, first-time visit to the city. R, can we go see the Shepherd's Hotel? Me, yes, we're actually a few minutes away. R, but this looks like a 60s building. Me, yes it is. Were you here to find the 30s shepherds? Well, he said yes. Unfortunately, that was gone with the 1950s revolution. As we stood there at the foot of the building, looking up at a skeleton covered in scaffolding and cloth, just like the 180 Strand here. And as much as I was certain of the place where I was standing, yet again, other images of skeletons came to mind across Cairo, the Middle East, Syria, Libya, Iraq, and the list can go far. Where I, or you, or many of us, and my friend included, could be standing or sitting in the presence of a skeleton or in its absence. Was this mourning? Was I mourning? Could it be an internal grieving sense of loss? Or was it an external one, induced by the working of the object encountered? What is it in that presence of the skeleton really marks? Is it temporality, an evidence of violence, a political power, ruling power, or just a pool of investors? Or maybe the encounter of an object, or maybe an object lost, or maybe just the hailing of a passing away, a life coming to an end, a death, or the arrival of a future, inevitable and uninvited. An onlooker could have mistaken the sight of us for two people waiting, which was actually happening. We were waiting for a car to take us to dinner. But that never made it on time, and where, in those minutes, we had to stay and linger in its presence. And what sort of a wait could be possible?
Alison Wenham, OBE, founding chairman of the Worldwide Independent Music Industry Network.
Alessandra. So my first early vivid memory at the age of about 6 was standing in my granddad's garden while he chopped up an upright piano for firewood. I was profoundly and unreasonably upset by this, and I didn't know why. I just knew that it was horribly wrong, a type of sacrilege. Throughout my childhood, we moved around the country and abroad about every 2 years, so we never settled anywhere for very long, and that meant never learning to play a musical instrument. Fast forward to 17, and I found myself in an A-level study group of students, and we had a room with a piano. It drew me inexorably towards it, and I started to play it, or murder it, as some might have said. Eventually, I asked the boy next door, a very talented violinist, to give me lessons. 9 months later, I passed my grade 5 with distinction, even though I couldn't read a note of music and I hadn't got a clue about theory or harmony, and I still don't. At the time, I was destined to go to a very good university to read English, of which I was a grade A student. But now, suddenly, everything had changed for me, and all I wanted to do was play the piano, learn music, and be with musicians. I soon realized, even though I'd started playing at the age of 17, my age was already an impediment, and that I was probably far too old to pursue a performing career. As a result, I've spent the last 40 years in the music business, essentially supporting the artists, the writers and composers in their own pursuit of excellence. This, to me, has not been a second-best choice. It's what I was destined to do. Every creative industry has at its core the creative man or woman. They write, they dream, they draw, they stitch, they design, play, they paint and invent. And then there are people like me, who aren't quite them, but who innately understands that the creative process of an artist needs time, love, support, and a professional team to bring their creative work to the widest possible audience. I have helped dozens of artists through difficult times. where a wrong note, a wrong word, a wrong studio could affect the outcome. And this, I have been able to get them through. I've never regretted the decision I made not to be a performer. Thank you.
Emily Orton, the co-founder of Dark Trace.
Hello. Well, I actually at university studied Golden Age Spanish literature, but it's not something I did pursue. I ended up working for an AI cybersecurity company. So not a natural choice either. And I think sometimes these things can happen by accident, but for a reason. I work for one of the fastest growing UK technology companies, which I'm really proud to do. We deploy our AI software to over 100 countries. We have 40 offices. We have 850 employees. And the punchline is, the amazing thing is, that we're just 5 years old. So incredible growth. But it's not just the growth that has been remarkable about Dark Trace. 40% of our employees in this tech company are female, and we're actually led by 2 female CEOs. It's quite remarkable. And so it shows that we're really trying to disrupt, not just technologically, but also from an organizational point of view. Cybersecurity is one of the critical issues of our times, and it's not something that any of us in this room can sweep under the carpet anymore. The personal data that you share on a daily basis and is held by corporations is vulnerable. Our democratic institutions, the ones that we rely on for fundamental freedoms, are at risk of being undermined by cyber attacks. Critical infrastructure, public services, all these things that we take for granted, like our healthcare, like our power grids and water supply, are vulnerable and at risk of being disrupted. In fact, we've already seen the physical impacts of a cyber attack on the real world in the Ukraine, where thousands of households were plunged into darkness as a result of a deliberate, targeted cyber attack. This is a big challenge of our times and not something that we necessarily have the answer to. AI is going to be a massive part of solving the problem, but there is no silver bullet. When I think about what's going to get us to the point where we have a better solution, it's about technology, but it's also about the people that we attract. And if I look at my team, it's not the people that come in with all the experience or have the right discipline of degree. It's about the people that have the confidence to ask the questions why, the people that have the humility to revise their assumptions as they go along. Those are the real disruptors in this industry, and we need more of them in cybersecurity.
Reverend Dr. Christina Beardsley, Church of England priest and retired hospital chaplain.
Her love was extravagant, pouring costly perfume over the rabbi's feet. She couldn't stop crying. Not just a woman, but a woman of the streets. People despised her, especially religious types. But not him. He praised her for what she'd done and said, whenever people remembered him, her name would be remembered. But it isn't. We know the men's names from his circle, but not her name, even though he expected us to remember it. Typical. For ages, I didn't know my own female name. I knew who I was, but not how to be me. Growing up, it was just too difficult. My parents were kind, but made it clear. So I hid, retreating from body into head, into books, into caring. But spirituality opens you up, if you let it, if you dare. And I did, eventually. And then I knew that I was completely loved, not as others expected me to be, but as I was and am deep inside. It also helped meeting Diane Tor, drag king extraordinaire, her mission to turn men into women and women into men just for a day, but mainly to help cisgender women to experience male privilege and power in her Man for a Day workshop. Her 5-day workshop, Gender in Performance, 20 years ago, filled me with psychic energy. My unconscious gave me a name, not my current name, archetypal from Greek mythology, Penelope, faithful wife, weaver who unraveled all her work at night, and forced to start again. What a gift! I had to stop unraveling things and claim my new name and identity, true name, in a church slow to ordain women as priests and not fully ready for clergy to be trans. But I had psychic energy now. It was time. Cautious to begin with, ready to negotiate, but not to compromise, no giving in to opposition when it came, as it did, no turning back, empowering myself so that I could empower other people.
Professor Dame Amanda Fisher, cell biologist and director of the Medical Research Council at Imperial College London.
Thank you. So my name's Mandy Fisher, and I'm a cell and molecular biologist. And I'm also a mother of 3, and I keep bantam hens for a hobby. So I came to science quite late in my life. I followed my best friend who wanted to do medicine through school, even though I wasn't particularly good at science. I was better at arts and languages. And went to university, and there I found something that I was genuinely quite good at, and that was devising experiments. And for most of my scientific career, I've been interested in a problem, which is how you go from a single fertilized egg to all the different cells you have in the body. And this is called cell commitment and cellular memory. And I'm interested in how this difference between different cells in your body manifests, because we all have exactly the same genome in every cell in our body. So I was asked to be part of this event, and I thought about it long and hard. And I decided to do it for 2 reasons. So one is my youngest daughter said, "Hey, Mum, you really should do it. So you always listen to your daughters." And I said yes. And the other was the theme of this event, which is about women having a voice. And in science in particular, I think, women have contributed majorly to scientific advancements, and they go largely unrecognized. So there was a brilliant microbiologist at Hammersmith Hospital, for example, who in the 1940s tracked infections that were going on through hospitals. And what she showed was that transmission of infections was going via staff and visitors through one ward to another. And she said, "You must wash your hands, and what about wearing a face mask?" And this was really kind of simple, but incredibly effective. She also predicted in 1947 that we were going to have massive problems with antibiotics and strains becoming resistant to antibiotics. I don't think she received any reward for this at all. So I think we really need to celebrate women in science and celebrate their contributions. Thank you very much.
Dame Edeline Lee, CHDBE, solo percussionist.
Life begins with listening, and life ends with listening. And every day we have the opportunity to create our listening bridges. Now, when I was 12 years old, I had my first percussion lesson. And I thought to listen was all about using your ears. I was wearing hearing aids, but yet the door was open to the music room. So inclusiveness was such an important part of my growth, and it's such an important part of my work today. That first percussion lesson lasted 30 seconds. My teacher gave me a snare drum. He said, "Take it away for a week. I'll see you next week." The second lesson was all about discovering the sound story within myself. He knew I was a farmer's daughter. So he said to me, "Edeline, please could you create the feel of a tractor?" Not the sound of a tractor, but the feel of a tractor. So suddenly in my mind, I had an orchestra of tractors. Is it a stationary tractor? Is it a brand new tractor? Is it an old rickety tractor? Is it a tractor going up a hill? What kind of tractor? So suddenly it was my choice as regards to what kind of feel. Now, feel generates interpretation. That first lesson could have been about, Evelyn, please stand out this, please make sure your arms are at a 90-degree angle, please strike the drum in this area here, and I would look at the teacher and ask for his permission if that sound was right or wrong. There was no right or wrong in this instance. The tractor was my sound meal, giving that to him. So he was basically trying to extract what was inside of me and to create this wonderful kind of emotional sound story. He was asking me to paint the room with sound, with colours, with grey sounds, with red sounds, with blue sounds, with textures, with dynamics. And that body then resonated in such a way that was far, far beyond anything that could come through the ears. This was overload, but this was resonating like a resonating chamber. And that allowed me to think, well, what is listening? What is listening? Listening isn't always about sound. It's about paying attention to all the ingredients around us. Every face. You're my favourite person when I look at you. You're my favourite person when I look at you. You're my favourite person when I look at you. Whichever piece is in front of me, that's my favourite piece of music. Whichever instrument is in front of me, that's my favourite instrument. So together, we have that opportunity to make a difference through the art of listening.